My name is Andy Connors, and I am 57 years old. I have lived long enough to see how family can be the greatest source of love and comfort, and at the same time the sharpest instrument of pain. I never imagined that the very people who brought me into this world could one day be the ones to crush me with their words and actions. But life has a way of teaching lessons in the cruelest way possible. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. Even though many years have passed, I was sitting at the kitchen table, holding my coffee, when my mother looked me square in the eyes and told me that my younger brother deserved the house more than I did. She did not hesitate. There was no softening, no explanation, just the cold certainty of her voice. Those words landed like a hammer striking stone. They did not just hurt, they burrowed inside me, settling in the corners of my mind and heart, growing heavier with every day that passed. For years I had thought that I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. That moment redefined it entirely. The story I'm about to tell is one I have kept buried deep within me for decades. It is not a story of boasting or showing off. It is not a story meant to make anyone feel sorry for me. I am telling it because there are people out there who have been pushed aside by those they love the most. People who have been silenced by the very people who promised to protect them. If you have ever felt invisible, unheard, or replaced, I want you to hear what happened to me, and how in the end, truth has a way of resurfacing no matter how deep it is buried. Sometimes you think you have lost everything, that the world has moved on without you, and that no one will ever understand what you endured. And then, in the most unexpected way, someone walks in with the truth in their hands. Plain, unassuming, yet powerful enough to undo years of lies. That moment is not just life-changing. It is soul-revealing. And it is a moment I will never forget. I still remember the day my grandfather arrived at the house, walking up the driveway without a single call ahead. He was 83 years old at the time, but he moved with a determination and purpose that could make a man half his age feel weak. He carried nothing but a plain, worn folder in his hand. It looked like it had been used and carried through decades of memories and secrets. The edges soft from handling, the cover faded from sunlight and years of care. Yet there was something about the way he held it, with both reverence and urgency, that made it clear that the contents of that folder were about to change everything. That folder contained a truth I had never imagined, a truth so powerful that it would force everyone in the room to reconsider everything they thought they knew about fairness, loyalty, and love. I want you to picture me as I tell you this story. I am sitting across from you, my hands folded, my voice low but steady. This is not a story about money or property or material possessions. This is a story about betrayal that cuts deeper than any knife. About the kind of injustice that feels unbearable because it comes from your own blood. And about the rare moments in life when justice arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, but with enough force to right the wrongs of decades. It is also a story about resilience, about patience, about the quiet strength that grows inside a man who refuses to let life define him by the wrongs done to him. The house that my mother tried to give away to my younger brother was more than a building of bricks and wood. It was the embodiment of my life, of the countless hours I had spent working and saving, of the pride and dignity my father had instilled in me. And yet my mother, in her blind favoritism, in her desire to control and dictate, tried to erase everything I had done, everything I had worked for, and everything my father had intended for me. My brother, oblivious, or maybe willing to play the part, stepped into that role without hesitation. They both believed I would stay quiet. They believed I would swallow the betrayal, tuck my dreams away, and vanish from their vision without a fight. But they underestimated me, and more importantly, they underestimated my grandfather. Because my grandfather had always been a quiet guardian of truth. He never interfered in petty disputes. He never let his emotions dictate his actions. He observed, he listened, and he waited. And he carried knowledge, evidence, and secrets that had been preserved through decades, waiting for the moment when the rightful owner of justice would claim it. And that moment came when he walked up to my driveway, the folder in his hand. Then changed everything. This is the story of how I, Andy Connors, was pushed aside by my own mother. How my younger brother took the house I worked for, the house my father had left me. And how my world seemed to crumble around me as those I loved most smiled as if my pain was irrelevant. This is the story of how life itself delivered justice, in the most quiet yet profound way, and how one folder, held in the hands of a man who refused to let lies stand, restored not just my property, but my dignity, my voice, and my sense of worth. Imagine my voice as if I am speaking to you in your living room. Imagine every emotion, every hesitation, every silent moment that I endured as the story unfolded. This is not just a story. It is an experience. It is a journey through the darkest moments of family betrayal, and the light that comes when the truth finally emerges. And it is a reminder that no matter how unfair life seems, no matter how much pain is inflicted by those you love most, truth has a way of finding its home, and justice can arrive quietly, without warning, to change everything you ever thought was lost. I grew up in a small town just outside Houston, a place where everybody knew your business before you even had a chance to do it yourself. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and the smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the summer evenings. I remember walking down those streets as a boy, carrying a backpack that felt heavier than my shoulders could bear, not because of the books inside, but because of the weight of expectation. My father was a quiet man, the kind of man who let his actions speak louder than words. Honest, hardworking. You could always count on him to fix a broken fence, repair a neighbor's roof, or lend a hand without asking for a word of thanks. He passed away when I was 21, leaving behind a silence that no one could fill and a lesson that I carried with me for the rest of my life. A man is measured by the life he builds, by the integrity he leaves behind, and by the respect he earns from those around him. My mother, on the other hand, was a different breed entirely. Sharp-tongued, controlling, always planning, always judging, always arranging everything according to her vision of the world. Harmony was never her priority. Power and control were. And within that world, my younger brother Mason was always her favorite. That was not merely my observation. Neighbors would whisper it behind closed doors. Aunt June would lean in at family gatherings and mutter it under her breath, afraid of being overheard. The preference was obvious in small ways. The way she smiled at Mason, the way she spoke to him, the way she made excuses for his mistakes while I was always expected to be perfect, to carry myself in ways that reflected her pride rather than my own. When I turned 36, I made the decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was going to build a house for myself. Not a mansion, not some sprawling estate, but a place that I could call mine. A place that reflected who I was and what I had worked for. I purchased a modest plot of land with money I had painstakingly saved from years of double shifts, late nights, and sacrifices that nobody seemed to notice. Every dollar I saved felt like a brick I could lay into the foundation of my future. I hammered in the nails myself. I lifted beams with hands that grew calloused and cracked. I spent nights sitting on the unfinished porch, my palms bleeding from splinters, staring at the horizon and feeling the satisfaction of building something with my own two hands. My father had always told me that a man should create something in his life that can be handed down, something that carries his name, his effort, and his dignity. That house was my offering to that lesson. It was my pride, my legacy, my anchor in a life that so often felt uncertain. But life, as I would come to learn, is never as simple as you imagine, in those quiet moments when hope seems alive. My mother moved in with me after she had a bad fall, a move that should have been temporary but lasted for too long, suffocating years. I cared for her. I cooked her meals, even when I was bone-tired. I cleaned the house, even when I had no energy left. I paid every medical bill, every prescription, every copay without complaint. I drove her to every doctor, every specialist, every appointment that seemed endless and pointless to her. I never once asked for help, never once suggested she contribute, because I thought that was the right thing to do. I believed in duty. I believed in loyalty. I believed the family was worth the exhaustion, worth the sacrifice, worth the fading of your own life into the needs of others. Mason rarely visited, which in some ways made the arrangement more bearable until he did. And when he did, my mother would find ways to make it clear that he deserved everything, that he was the favored child, that he was entitled to opportunities that I had labored for and earned. She would say things casually, almost as if I were not in the room, like Mason deserves something too, or Mason should get a piece of this house one day. Her words were soft but sharp, like a knife hidden in velvet. I would smile and stay quiet, because arguing with her felt like trying to stop the wind. Pointless, exhausting, ineffective. And then, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. I came home from work earlier than expected, dragging myself through the familiar creak of the front door, thinking of nothing more than a quiet dinner and the relief of sitting down for a moment. But the scene that greeted me at the kitchen table stopped me cold. Papers were spread out across the surface, letters, legal documents, receipts, scribbled notes. My mother looked up at me with an expression I could not immediately place. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was something else. Something terrifyingly calm. Something close to satisfaction. My younger brother Mason sat across from her, folding the papers with a smug little smile that seemed to mock the effort and sacrifices I had made for decades. She told me with cold certainty that she was making sure things were fair. That Mason deserved the house more than I did because he had a brighter future. The words struck me harder than any blow could. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My chest tightened. The air in the room grew heavy. I asked her what she meant. My voice barely more than a whisper, and she repeated it. The house would go to Mason, not me. She had already arranged everything. Everything I had built, every ounce of effort I had poured into that land. Every sleepless night, every pinch of sacrifice, all of it erased with a few sentences. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice. I simply stared at her, trying to reconcile the reality of what I was hearing. The woman I had cared for, the woman whose groceries are carried, whose bills I paid, whose health I tended to with unwavering dedication, had decided my future without even consulting me. My brother did not even look at me, as if he were unaware of the betrayal unfolding before him, or as if he did not care. I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun beating down on me, and felt something deep inside me begin to shut down. I walked to the fence, resting my hands against the rough wood, staring out at the horizon, wondering how a life built on honesty and effort could be so easily dismissed by those I trusted the most. For weeks, I tried to talk to my mother. I approached her with patience, with calm words, hoping to appeal to the part of her that I thought loved me. But she brushed me off every time. She said I was overreacting. She said Mason needed the house more than I did. She said I should not question her decisions. Mason carried himself like a king surveying his kingdom, entirely confident the victory had been secured. Most people imagine betrayal as something sudden, something dramatic, something that hits like a lightning strike. But real betrayal often arrives quietly. It sits at your table, it shares your meals, it breathes the same air, and slowly, without warning, it burrows into your bones. It teaches you a lesson in patience and endurance, in observing cruelty without permission to fight back, in understanding that sometimes the ones who hurt you most are those who should have protected you. That was the day when the foundation of my life began to shift. I did not realize it at the time. I did not understand that this quiet theft of everything I had earned would set me on a path that would ultimately lead to a confrontation, a revelation, and a justice that even I could not have imagined. Little did I know that every sleepless night, every quiet moment of heartbreak, every feeling of being pushed aside, was building toward a single, defining moment. The day my grandfather would walk up my driveway holding a plain, worn folder. The day that every lie would crumble, and the day my voice would finally be restored. The weeks after my mother openly chose Mason over me were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. It was as if the ground beneath me had turned into thick, suffocating mud, and every step I took required the effort of 100 men. Every breath I drew felt slower, heavier, like the air itself had thickened with despair and disappointment. I told myself that maybe things would calm down, that perhaps my mother would eventually see how unfair her decision was, how much I had sacrificed for this house, for her, for this family. But she did not. Instead, she grew colder, shorter, sharper, more unrecognizable with each passing day. The woman I had cared for, the woman I had honored and served, had become a stranger in the walls of the house I built. I tried to reason with myself, to find some logic in her actions, some excuse I could hold on to so that I would not be completely crushed. Perhaps she believed Mason had a brighter future. Perhaps she thought I was too old to start over. Perhaps she simply could not see me the way she used to. But deep down, I knew there was no excuse for the betrayal I felt. No justification for the way she had cast me aside without hesitation. I was still her son, the man who had carried her groceries, paid her bills, driven her to countless doctors, and cared for her when she could not care for herself. And yet, her loyalty had a limit, and that limit was Mason. Then came the night that broke me in a way I had not imagined. She came to me in the hallway, her eyes devoid of any softness, and told me to pack my things. She said Mason needed space, that he needed to start fresh in the house that I had built, A house that bore my sweat, my effort, and my dreams. My house, the one my father had left me in trust and hope, was suddenly not mine anymore. I stood in that hallway, staring at her, trying to understand how she could say such words without hesitation. How she could look at me with a calm that was almost cruel. It felt as if she had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in her mind for years, anticipating the precise way she would erase me from the home I loved. I packed what I could carry, a few clothes, a small bag of essentials, leaving behind everything else that had been mine for years. The rest of my belongings remained behind, inside the house that my hands had built, the walls that had witnessed my struggles. My nights of exhaustion, my dreams whispered into the empty rooms. I stayed with a friend, sleeping on a couch that felt alien beneath me, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of the world that had suddenly turned against me. I felt ashamed, foolish, discarded, like an old piece of furniture shoved into a corner and forgotten. People often say you should forgive your family, that blood is thicker than water, that loyalty must endure, even in the face of cruelty. But how do you forgive someone who pushes you out of your life without a second thought, who smiles as they do it, who erases your existence, as if it were a minor inconvenience? The days dragged on like an endless desert, each one hotter, heavier, and lonelier than the last. Mason began posting online, showing the house as if it were a crown he had earned, bragging about the place that had been mine, flaunting it to friends, neighbors, and anyone who would look. My mother posting pictures with him, smiling as if removing me from the home was some grand victory, a triumph she could parade to the world without remorse. Every image, every caption, every subtle boast twisted the knife deeper into my chest. It was not just the loss of a house. It was the loss of respect, the loss of recognition, the erasure of years of effort, sacrifice, and loyalty. I tried to move on. I tried to convince myself that life would eventually settle, that maybe I could rebuild somewhere else, start anew, leave the pain behind. But my heart refused to rest. Something deep inside me, some instinct I could not name, whispered that this story was not finished, that the ending I had been handed was a lie. A temporary illusion crafted to make me accept my defeat. I could not explain it. I had no proof, no plan, no certainty. But the feeling persisted, gnawing at my gut, keeping me awake at night, making the silence in my friend's spare room unbearable. The universe, or fate, or whatever force governs. The truth was telling me that this was not over. That the injustice I had suffered had a counterweight waiting somewhere, unseen but real, ready to tip the scales. I did not know how right that feeling would prove to be. I did not know that the slow, suffocating weight of betrayal would soon be lifted by a hand I trusted more than anyone else. A hand that carried the power to expose decades of lies and restore not just my house, but my dignity, my voice, and the life I had been stripped of. That sense of unfinished business, of hidden truth, of justice waiting silently, became my quiet obsession. Every day I woke up with it pressing against my chest, a reminder that patience and vigilance are sometimes the only weapons a person has when life turns against them. And in the back of my mind, I kept seeing my grandfather's face, calm yet piercing, always observing, always waiting. I did not know what he held. I did not know when he would act. But somehow, I trusted that when the time came, The weight of the injustice, the betrayal, and the arrogance of those who thought they had won would be overturned in a way that no one could ignore. And though I did not know it at the time, that quiet, restless feeling inside me was the heartbeat of the moment I'd been waiting for all along. The day when everything would snap, the day when truth would finally break free, and the day when life would demand reckoning. It had been a long, restless week. Every night I lay awake, turning over the memory of my mother's betrayal, the weight of Mason's smug smile, and the hollow ache of walking away from the house I had built with my own hands. I had begun to feel as if life had swallowed me whole, as if the world had conspired to erase every ounce of effort, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night I had spent crafting a home that was supposed to be mine. And then, one morning, a sound at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to see my grandfather standing there, upright and steady, as if the years had carved discipline into his very bones. In his hand was a folder, plain, worn, edges softened by time, the kind of folder that had carried secrets for decades. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting, a joke, or even a word about the weather. He simply said, in a voice calm yet heavy with purpose, "Andy, we need to speak." There was no urgency, no panic, just the quiet authority of a man who knows that what he carries in his hands can change everything. I stepped aside, letting him in. We walked into the living room where I had been trying to convince myself that life could continue as if nothing had happened. He placed the folder on the table between us, resting his large weathered hand on top of it. For a moment, he lingered there, as though holding back a storm, as though waiting for the right words to come. I felt the air thicken, my heart beat faster, and every muscle in my body seemed to tighten. Something inside me told me that the moment I'd been waiting for all these years had finally arrived. He began to speak. His voice was low, deliberate, measured, as if every word had been chosen carefully over decades. He told me that years ago, after my father had passed away, he discovered documents that changed everything. Documents that were meant to protect my father's legacy. Documents that clearly outlined what my father intended for the future of our family. And more specifically, for me. He never shared them at the time because he believed in my mother's sense of duty, in her promise to do the right thing, in her ability to protect me and honor what my father had built. He trusted her. He thought she would follow the path of fairness and integrity without needing intervention. But she did not. He slowly lifted his hand from the folder and opened it carefully, as though revealing a sacred artifact. The contents were simple at first. Glance, papers, letters, receipts, legal documents. But their weight hit me instantly. My heart began to pound. My chest tightened. I could feel the blood rushing to my head as I recognized my father's handwriting across the pages. Every letter, every note, every signature carried the authority of a man who would work tirelessly to leave behind something meaningful. There were deeds that proved the house was legally mine, receipts for the purchase and improvements I had made with my own money, and letters my father had written, clearly stating his intentions. Not to my mother, not to Mason, to me. Every line, every word, screamed the truth I had been denied, the justice I had been owed. I stared at the folder, unable to speak at first. The weight of realization hit me in waves. My father had trusted me. My mother had betrayed that trust. She had taken the house from me, knowing full well that it was never hers to give. knowing full well that she had no right to decide its future. My grandfather continued, his voice steady but tinged with anger he did not show, explaining that he had kept copies of these documents all these years because he never fully trusted her judgment, because he feared one day the truth might need to be revealed, because he understood that sometimes those closest to us are capable of the most profound betrayals. He had hoped the day would never come. But now, faced with the injustice that had stripped me of my home, he had no choice. The truth had to be revealed. I sat there, silent, absorbing every word, every paper, every realization. The betrayal that had weighed on me for so long suddenly transformed into clarity. My mother had lied. My mother had schemed. My mother had smiled and posed as if she were granting my brother a gift, all while hiding the reality that the house had never been hers to give. She had undermined my efforts, my work, my sacrifices, and my father's intentions, all to place Mason in a position he did not earn and had no right to claim. That moment, a folder. My grandfather's calm authority, the undeniable truth. In my hands was the turning point I'd been waiting for without even realizing it. It was as if time itself had slowed down, focusing every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of light in the room on that one truth. Justice had arrived, quietly, inevitably, and irrevocably. I looked at my grandfather, and for the first time in years, I felt a surge of hope. This was more than papers. This was more than legal proof. It was validation. It was restoration. It was the sound of my voice returning after years of being silenced. The house, my labor, my father's legacy, and my dignity, everything my mother had tried to erase, could finally be reclaimed. That day, in that quiet living room, with the folder between us, I realized that the battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The scales were beginning to tip, and the reckoning that had been waiting for decades was now inevitable. After my grandfather revealed the folder and the truth of my father's intentions, I felt a mixture of relief and something heavier, something that weighed on me like iron chains. Relief, because finally the betrayal had a name. Finally, I could see the facts laid bare. Finally, I knew I had not been wrong to feel hurt, discarded, and outraged. But the heavier feeling, the one that pressed down on my chest, was responsibility. Responsibility to act. Responsibility to claim what was mine. Responsibility to honor my father's wishes and the years of effort I had poured into that house. I realized in that moment that I did not want revenge that hurt anyone physically. I did not want shouting marches or public humiliation or anything that would make my heart dirty with regret. What I wanted was justice. Clear, quiet, strong justice, the kind of justice that forces someone to confront the truth of their actions, face their own reflection, and realize there is no excuse, no defense, no hiding from what they have done. I sat with my grandfather. Late that night, the folder between us, the quiet ticking of the clock filling the room. We talked about the possibilities, the options, the ways to reclaim what had been wrongfully taken from me. He had lived long enough to understand that power often hides behind comfort. The people grow bold when they believe no one will challenge them, and that timing is everything. He said nothing directly about confrontation. He did not tell me to strike or to shame. He only reminded me that patience and strategy are sometimes sharper than anger and fury. That letting the world unfold while you prepare can be more devastating than any immediate retaliation. The next day, I met with a lawyer. The man was older, experienced, someone who had handled countless family disputes over decades. When we laid the documents on his desk, he leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief, muttering under his breath about how outrageous it was that such an injustice could have been allowed to persist for so long. He explained, step by step, the implications of what we had uncovered. The house, he said, was legally mine. Every signature, every deed, every word written by my father made that unmistakably clear. The transfer to Mason, he said, had no legal foundation. My mother had no right, no authority, no power to move me out of a home that was never hers to give. He even mentioned the potential consequences for her attempt to sideline me, though I did not pay much attention to that part. What mattered to me was the restoration, the reclamation, the rightful return of what had been stolen. I did not tell my mother or Mason that I knew the truth. I did not call them. I did not hint. I did not leave messages that might alert them. I let them continue, believing they had won, that they had outmaneuvered me, that they had finally claimed victory. There was a method in this silence. Sometimes silence is the sharpest tool a person can wield. Sometimes allowing people to feel safe, confident, and untouchable makes the eventual reveal hit harder. Like a storm breaking over a calm landscape. I wanted them to settle into their false sense of triumph, to walk in their own arrogance, before everything they believed came crashing down. The days passed slowly. Every morning I woke with a mix of fear and strength. Fear of failure, fear of confrontation, fear of the chaos that might ensue when the truth was revealed. Strength born from knowing I was standing for what was right, knowing my father had entrusted me with this legacy, knowing my grandfather had prepared me for this moment, knowing that the path I was on was not about anger, but about justice. I felt restless, almost like a coiled spring ready to release, pacing around the small room I was staying in, reviewing every detail, imagining every possible reaction from my mother and Mason. 2 weeks later, everything was ready. My lawyer had prepared all the documents, filed everything that needed filing, and ensured that the legal side of this battle would leave no room for dispute. My grandfather remained quietly close by, a steady presence, not interfering but silently assuring me that whatever happened, I was not alone. He never once tried to rush me, never tried to push me toward confrontation before I was ready. His presence alone reminded me of the decades of wisdom he carried, the patience that comes with knowing when to act and when to wait. And then the day came. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor, ordinary and calm as if the world itself had no idea of the storm that was about to arrive. My lawyer leaned across the table, glanced at me with a firm nod, and said simply, "This is the time." There were no dramatic speeches, no pumping up, no false bravado. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that would finally restore what had been stolen from me, had arrived. I took a deep breath, feeling the mix of tension and anticipation pulsing through my veins. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the entire mess behind, to retreat into quiet, anonymity, and pretend the house and the betrayal never existed. But the other part, the part my father had instilled in me, the part that had built that house from the ground up with my own hands, the part that had endured the quiet cruelty of my mother and the smugness of my brother, wanted to walk straight through it. Step by step, document by document, truth by truth. I was ready to reclaim my life, ready to make the betrayal, the lies, and the arrogance face the weight of reality. Ready to let justice speak louder than anger, louder than guilt, louder than the smiles that had so confidently celebrated a hollow victory. That day, I realized, was not just about the house. It was about integrity, about honesty, about proving that what is right cannot be stolen forever, about reclaiming not just a building, but every ounce of dignity, every drop of effort, every memory tied to a life I had devoted to doing what was right. And as I looked at my grandfather sitting calmly beside me, the folder closed and ready, I felt the quiet fire of determination rise inside me. The fight was about to begin, and this time, I knew I would not lose. The day I drove up to the house with my grandfather felt strange, heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest, a drum of anticipation and fear and determination all at once. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. The trees swaying gently in the breeze, the sunlight catching on windows' butts. Nothing outside could hide the storm that was about to break inside those walls. I parked my car and walked up the driveway with my grandfather at my side, steady, calm. A presence that grounded me while also reminding me of the years of secrets, patience, and wisdom he carried. Mason opened the door before I could even knock. His expression was that of mild annoyance, the kind that said he was inconvenienced by our visit, as if we were disturbing his perfect little world. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone dripping with irritation. He looked at me with a casual confidence that I had long since learned to read as arrogance. Behind him, the hallway stretched into the familiar rooms I had built. Rooms filled with memories that were mine, now co-opted by someone who had never earned them. My mother appeared in the hallway moments later, looking every bit as irritated as Mason, as if our presence had ruined her day, as if we had dared to intrude on the life she had claimed by deceit. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her posture stiffened, and I could almost feel the weight of years of favoritism and manipulation radiating off her. But there was nothing she could say that would prepare her for what was coming. My grandfather placed the folder on the center of the dining table. He rested his hand on top of it for a moment, steady, deliberate, as if holding back a force that had been gathering for decades. He looked at my mother, his eyes unwavering, calm, piercing in a way that seemed to cut through every lie she had spoken over the years. "Why did you hide the truth?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the room. "Why did you lie? Why did you try to erase Andy from his own future?" My mother froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. Her face, once confident and commanding, seemed to shrink as color drained from it, leaving her pale and uncertain. Mason, on the other hand, looked between us, confusion flashing in his eyes. He had never seen my mother like this, hesitant, faltering, exposed, slowly. My grandfather opened the folder and began laying out the documents, one by one. Each paper seemed heavier than the last. There were letters from my father, written in his unmistakable handwriting, filled with care, intent, and clarity. There was the deed to the house, every legal agreement painstakingly detailed, every signature where it needed to be. Each document told the story that had been hidden for years. Each paper revealed the truth that my mother had tried so hard to bury. The room fell silent except for the faint rustle of paper, as my grandfather methodically revealed every piece of evidence. At first, my mother tried to deny it, her words fumbling and weak. I don't remember. I think. Maybe your father changed his mind, she stammered, her excuses sounding hollow even to herself. Then she shifted to blame, trying to spin confusion into legitimacy, as if claiming ignorance could erase years of deliberate favoritism. But my grandfather did not waver. He shook his head slowly, the weight of decades behind his words, and said, "I have known the truth for decades. You chose favoritism over fairness. You broke your own family to give Mason something he never earned." For the first time, Mason did not have a word to say. He stood frozen, his confidence evaporated, replaced by disbelief. His face fell as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. Every photo he had posted, every story he had told, every little boast about the house, it was all built on a lie. The truth washed over him with a silent, relentless force, leaving him exposed and humbled in a way he had never experienced before. Minutes later, my lawyer arrived, calm and precise, carrying the final confirmation of what my grandfather had already revealed. He handed my mother official papers, legal documentation confirming beyond any doubt that the house was legally mine. The room felt heavy, silent, and uncomfortable. Every breath seemed to echo in the walls, carrying the weight of betrayal, exposure, and reckoning. There was no shouting, no dramatic outbursts, no yelling, just the quiet, undeniable truth laying itself bare. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult them or gloat. I simply looked at my mother and Mason, steady and calm, and said, "I am taking back what was always mine. I hope one day you understand what you have done." There was no anger in my voice, only clarity, a quiet force that came from knowing the truth, from standing firmly in it, from reclaiming the life, the home, and the dignity that had been stolen from me. And in that living room, surrounded by the evidence of years of lies and deceit, I felt the weight of justice settle, a calm yet powerful wave that shifted everything. The house was mine. My father's legacy was honored. And the arrogance and deceit that had been hidden for so long finally crumbled under the certainty of truth. The days that followed the confrontation felt surreal, almost as if I had stepped into a world slightly out of sync with reality. Mason left the house within a week. He did not argue, did not fight, did not even plead. I think deep down he knew, in that quiet corner of his mind he refused to acknowledge, that the house was never truly his, that every claim he had made, every boast he had broadcasted had been hollow. I did not gloat. I did not feel satisfaction in seeing him leave. Instead, I felt a strange weight lift from my chest, a subtle release of tension that had been coiled inside me for years. The house, finally, was quiet, waiting for me to reclaim not just its rooms and walls, but the memories, the sweat, and the dreams I had poured into it over decades. My mother, however, refused to speak to me. She packed her belongings with a methodical silence, moving her things to my Aunt June's house as if avoiding any unnecessary interaction would somehow preserve her dignity. She told relatives that I had embarrassed her, that I had betrayed her, that I had acted recklessly and without respect. She never once acknowledged the betrayal she had orchestrated, the years of favoritism, the attempts to erase me from the life and home I had earned. Her pride, her stubbornness, and her inability to face her own actions created a strange chasm between us, one that felt impossible to cross in those first weeks. I did not try to bridge it. I simply accepted the silence, knowing that acknowledgement, if it ever came, would have to be her decision. During that period, my grandfather visited me often. He came with quiet words, steady presence, and a calm reassurance that seemed to absorb the chaos of the past weeks. He told me he was proud of me, proud that I had not been swayed by anger or bitterness, proud that I had pursued justice with patience, clarity, and integrity. He reminded me that my father would have wanted me to fight for myself, to honor the life he had built, and to reclaim what was rightfully mine without compromising who I was in the process. His approval, his calm strength, reminded me that family could be a source of guidance and resilience, even when betrayal and deceit seemed to dominate everything else. The neighbors began to notice the shift as well. Whispers floated along the sidewalks, through the fences, over morning coffees and grocery trips. Some were supportive, nodding and expressing quiet respect for the way I had handled the situation. Others judged, questioning why I had gone to such lengths, why I had involved lawyers, why I had challenged my own mother so publicly. At first, the opinions of others gnawed at me, stirring doubts and anxieties. But over time, I realized something essential. Other people's judgments do not build your life. Their whispers, their stares, their comments, whether approving or critical, are inconsequential. What matters is the choices you make, the courage you muster, the integrity you hold, and the determination to reclaim what is rightfully yours. I moved back into the house slowly, deliberately, as if each step was a small ceremony of reclamation. The first few nights were the hardest. The rooms felt empty and cold, like they had absorbed the weight of every betrayal, every whispered favoritism, every unspoken lie that had taken place within those walls. The living room, where Mason had lounged and my mother had schemed, felt especially quiet, almost haunting. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of tension, every floorboard whispered of conflict. I would walk through the hallways, touching the walls, feeling the floors, letting the house remind me of all the nights I had spent hammering nails, painting, and building something that would last generations. But slowly, very slowly, the house began to breathe again. Its walls started to feel like they belonged to me, as if they recognized that their rightful owner had returned. I felt my father's presence in quiet ways. A photo on the mantel catching the morning light, the faint creak of a stair I had repaired decades ago, the aroma of the coffee we used to share lingering faintly in the kitchen. I felt closer to him than I had in years, as if the house itself was whispering that justice had been restored, that his intentions had finally been honored, and that my own life could move forward, unshackled from the weight of betrayal. The first morning I woke in my own bed, surrounded by the familiar walls I had built and nurtured, I realized the house had returned not just to me, but with it had come clarity and a sense of peace I had not felt in years. The betrayal had been exposed, the lies had crumbled, and the arrogance of my mother and Mason had been met with the quiet force of truth. For the first time in decades, I felt that my own future, my own life, and my own dignity were fully intact. And the house no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a home again, a sanctuary, and a testament to the strength of standing firm for what is right. Months passed slowly, almost imperceptibly, like water shaping stone, smoothing the rough edges of anger and hurt that had once consumed every corner of my life. The conflict that had seemed all-encompassing, the tension that had gripped me so tightly I thought it might never release, gradually settled into silence. The anger softened, not entirely gone, but transformed into something quieter, something wiser. I realized that peace was not about forgetting the betrayal, nor about pretending the past did not exist. Peace was about reclaiming your life in the face of it, about rebuilding slowly, deliberately, until the weight of the wrongs you had endured no longer dictated the rhythm of your days. I turned my focus to the house, the home that had been at the center of this storm. I started with small things at first, almost ceremoniously, as if each act of repair was a way to stitch my own heart back together. I fixed the garden, planting flowers in the spots where my father had once tended them, imagining him watching over me with quiet pride. I repaired the fence that had been cracked and weathered by years of neglect, piece by piece, until it stood strong again, a boundary that symbolized not just the property but the life I had fought to reclaim. I painted the living room in soft, warm tones, watching the colors breathe life into the space, watching the house finally begin to feel like mine again. With each task, no matter how small, I could feel the tension of the past loosening, like a heavy fog lifting off the land. Slowly, the house became more than walls and floors. It became a reflection of my own peace, a sanctuary that spoke of endurance, justice, and quiet triumph. During this time, my grandfather's health began to decline. The same man who had guided me through the storm of betrayal, who had carried decades of wisdom and patience, who had handed me the folder that changed everything, was now growing weaker. I cared for him with the same devotion I had once given to my mother, with quiet attention to every need, gentle words to soothe his frustration, and steady hands to support him as he moved through the days. He would sit in his favorite chair, eyes thoughtful, hands clasped, and speak to me about life in ways that made the years of pain and struggle feel like part of a larger tapestry. Loyalty, he said one afternoon, his voice weak but steady, should never be blind. Trust should be earned, not assumed. Standing up for yourself is not disrespect, it is survival. His words, soaked in experience, became a guiding principle I carried into every action, every decision, and every step I took in rebuilding not just the house, but my own sense of self. Time passed, as it always does, and eventually the day came when my grandfather's journey ended. He passed away peacefully, leaving behind a legacy of wisdom, patience, and love that had guided me through one of the most tumultuous periods of my life. In my hands, I held the same folder that had begun it all, worn at the edges, heavy with the weight of decades. That folder had changed everything. It had brought justice where betrayal had threatened to dominate. It had reminded me of my father's love, of his foresight, and of the principles he had lived by. It was more than papers and signatures. It was a symbol of truth, a testament to endurance, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the right path can be reclaimed. Sitting in the living room, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors I had rebuilt with care, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the hurt, it had all been real. And yet so had the strength, the resilience, and the quiet victories that followed. I understood now that life does not always hand you justice on a silver platter, that sometimes you have to fight for it, quietly, patiently, deliberately, and with unwavering resolve. And when you do, the peace that follows is more profound than any fleeting satisfaction of revenge. As I placed the folder back on the shelf, alongside photographs of my father and memories of my grandfather, I felt a calm settle over me. The house was mine, the legacy was intact, and I could finally breathe without the weight of deceit pressing on my chest. Life had returned not as it once was, but as it should have been, a life shaped by truth, anchored in family, strengthened by resilience, and guided by the knowledge that standing up for yourself is always worth the struggle. The storms had passed. The house had returned to its rightful place, and within it, I found the quiet, enduring peace that comes only after justice has been claimed, lessons have been learned, and the heart has been set free. As I sit here today, looking around the house I built with my own hands, I realize that the story I've lived is far bigger than a single building, far bigger than bricks, mortar, and land. The lessons I carry are not about money, inheritance, or even family disputes. They are about life itself, about the way the world can challenge you in ways you never expect, and about the strength that comes from standing firm when the people you love most turn against you. I have learned that betrayal does not always come from strangers. It does not always come from those outside your life. Often, it comes from the very people who should protect you, who should champion your existence, who should love you without conditions. And yet, as painful as that realization was, I also learned something more important. Betrayal does not define you. The choices you make afterward, the courage you summon, the patience you practice, and the integrity you hold in the face of it all, that is what defines who you are. I learned that silence, carefully chosen and deliberately maintained, is powerful. There were days when I said nothing, when I let my mother and Mason believe they had won, when I let them settle into their arrogance. And in that silence, a quiet storm was brewing. But I also learned that truth is stronger than silence. Truth cannot be hidden forever. Truth has a way of surfacing, of revealing itself, even when it seems buried under years of lies, favoritism, and deceit. The folder my grandfather carried, plain, worn, unassuming, was a testament to that truth. It did not shout, it did not demand attention, it did not need to roar. Yet when it was revealed, its power was undeniable. It changed everything quietly, calmly, and irrevocably. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives softly, patiently, and deliberately in ways that no one anticipates. I also learned that life has its own sense of timing, its own sense of balance. For years, it felt as though everything I had built, everything I had worked for had been stolen, erased, or dismissed. I wondered if I would ever reclaim my voice, my worth, my dignity. And yet, life has a way of circling back, of restoring what has been lost, of delivering what was always meant to be. Even when others try to bury the truth, even when they manipulate, deceive, or twist reality to suit their own desires, the truth finds a way to rise, to assert itself, to bring justice in its own time. That realization, that patient, relentless, inevitable force of truth, has changed the way I approach everything in life. My story is not about winning a house. It is not about property lines, deeds, or legal victories. It is about reclaiming something far more important: my dignity, my voice, my self-respect, and my worth. Every nail I hammered, every dollar I saved, every night I worked late was not just for walls and floors. It was for the life I believed I deserved, for the future my father envisioned, for the principles I would not compromise. And in reclaiming what was mine, I also reclaimed a part of myself that I had feared lost forever. To anyone who feels unheard, to anyone who feels pushed aside, to anyone who feels forgotten or dismissed by those they trusted most, I want you to remember this. Life has a way of circling back. The truth has a way of finding its way home. Your voice, your worth, your dignity cannot be stolen permanently. Patience, courage, integrity, and resilience are your strongest allies. Stand firm, hold your ground, and trust that justice, quiet, inevitable, and powerful, will arrive in ways you may never expect. As I sit here in the quiet of my home, feeling the sun spill across the floors, hearing the faint creak of stairs I repaired long ago, I understand something deeply human and profoundly simple. Life will always reveal what is right. People may falter, betray, or attempt to take what is yours. But if you remain true to yourself, if you fight with integrity and patience, the truth will rise, and the world will finally see what has always been yours. And in that moment, the peace, the justice, and the fulfillment that follows are more powerful than any conflict, more lasting than any victory, and more meaningful than words can ever capture. This is the journey I have lived. This is the truth I carry. And this is the lesson I hope anyone listening will never forget. The truth always finds its way home.